Hey everybody, how we doing? I'm Dave Graber.
And I'm Kelsey Anderson.
And welcome to another edition of Buffalo Brief on this Tuesday. We're kind of dreary outside, and man, if you've been out, we are socked into the fog. And sadly, as I woke up this morning, I opened the window because I went out for a run, and I thought, oh man, it is really socked in. And then I read the weather, and I think it said something like this dense fog is going to be around. It's going to be a little bit lighter this afternoon, and then tonight again, we're going to get socked back in. But I feel like we get this kind of every winter because of the difference in the temperature, of course, in aloft versus the snowpack we have, and that's going fast.
Our Buffalo Brief weather person, Dave Graber.
Sorry, I was all excited about it.
Dave is very into it. I will say the positive about today.
Yeah.
I saw my deck for the first time in a month and a half.
Yeah, that is a positive.
Because
everybody's winning the driveway more.
Yes, that, obviously we have these higher temperatures, but also fog eats away at the snowpack itself.
Yeah, you were saying that yesterday.
Yeah.
So not great for the folks, but I'm sure we'll get plenty of ski season left. It is still early in 2026, and of course that means that we are still deeply in the budgeting season for the state budget. What we just experienced and what state leaders across New York State just experienced in Albany was the annual Tin Cup Day, where leaders of the municipalities and pretty much all the larger municipalities, but what we're really focused on for our purposes is Buffalo's Mayor Sean Ryan and Niagara Falls Mayor Ristino were there basically asking legislators what they could do for their respective cities. Sean Ryan and Mayor Ristino, both in pretty difficult positions. We want to bring in Jack O'Donnell of O'Donnell and Associates to talk a little bit about not only Tin Cup Day, but also the other ongoings in Albany. Jack, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Jack, we want to have this as kind of a regular appearance here, just because this is going to be an important, we think, session in Albany because of the financial status of the city of Buffalo.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, first of all, Jack, explain what Tin Cup Day is. And Dave, you did a pretty good job at explaining it. Sure. But why is it called that? What is Tin Cup Day exactly?
What a good question, right? So I know we've talked about, and people are aware that Governor Hochul proposed her executive budget. As a result of that, the state legislature holds joint budget hearings, and they do this on basically every subject, right? Health, transportation, energy. And what happens is the governor's senior advisors come out and answer questions, and then they also hear from folks from around the state, advocacy groups, practitioners, people who are affected by this. So one day is local government day. And so that was last week. Because so many municipalities are often looking for help, this has become Tin Cup Day, right? Where the mayors and town leaders are holding out their hands, holding out their tin cups and saying, please, 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 just a couple more dollars.
Very good explanation there.
They will justify this, of course. The state or localities will justify this by saying, listen, half of these requests are because of so many unfunded state mandates, right? The state legislature sits here in Albany and says, do this and do that. Well, it costs money, and it's not funded by Albany. That's sort of their justification. Let's talk about Mayor Sean Ryan. He is in a pickle and knows that he has been. They put a lot of blame on the prior administration and didn't really pull any punches. Was there anything surprising about that presentation from Sean Ryan relative to his callbacks from the Brown administration and or what he plans to do in the future?
I don't think there was a lot surprising.
Yeah.
I think he's previewed some of this in the campaign, and I think people in Buffalo voted for his vision, right? And now he has to try to actualize it. Yeah. And that's hard without money. Mm-hmm. And so that's where he was in Albany. And look, I think he did a good job having come from the state legislature. He certainly had a lot of friends up there, made some connections, but did a good job really getting into the weeds. Questions about different subjects, bringing it back to the waterfront and the sewers and, putting all of that together. So I thought he did a good job.
I'm going to read a quote from him. He said, "Our services have already been cut to the bone. Yep. There's not much left to trim. But if we don't begin to close our budget gaps, the only option is to further reduce our police force and fire department and city workers as well." What are the options for these cities? Albany was there. Rochester was there. What are the options? We're talking about AIM funding. We're talking about temporary municipal assistance, TMA funding that we've seen the past couple of years. Explain those options.
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, everything's on the table, right? I thought it was interesting. Mayor Ryan was joined by the mayors of Syracuse and Albany, who are both new. And they talked a lot about the same challenges that urban centers have had. The state, the federal government have basically been disinvesting in these municipalities for a while. What are the options? I mean, the options are kind of wide open. AIM and aid, in kind of municipalities is a big program. We have seen proposals from different legislators. We've heard from Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes talking about maybe it's time to increase this, right? This is broadly money that comes without strings that municipalities can work their way around. But everybody had sort of a different take on this. And that's kind of the whole idea here, is to get in front of the Assembly, get in front of the Senate. Early March, they will both put out sort of their counters to the governor's budget, and they'll have a few different things in there. And it comes down to, what can the mayors negotiate? And can they negotiate together? Because frankly, upstate's a lot stronger when we're speaking with one voice.
That's very true. We're not here to talk about finances. We're here to talk about politics. But I am curious. Sean Ryan's request to the legislature was to basically have them give the thumbs up on the allowance of using the Fiscal Stability Authority to borrow up to $500 million. Now, he's doing that in addition to already saying that we are going to raise taxes. We've asked him each time we've had that discussion here and elsewhere on News 4 at 5:30 if he has an idea of what that amount is. He hasn't really said what that is. So we know that he's going to have to raise taxes at some point. The legislature is probably going to give him the allowance to borrow at least half of that, maybe $250 million. What is that going to do for him politically? Has he already laid enough groundwork, I guess, laid enough road to be able to travel that road in the next several months?
I think some of it, yes, right? I mean, again, these aren't new. It's not just he talked about him in the campaign.
Right.
He put forward the borrowing suggestion last year. He had a bill on it. It failed because the current, at the time, the mayor had a different vision and was able to get support for that. You could see the mayor's working relationship with Senator April Baskin and some of the questions she asked. She has been a sponsor of some of that borrowing. They talk about how that worked for the county years ago during the first control board era and how some of that worked. So I think most folks feel like some of that's compelling, and I think something will happen. Of course, it'll be less, or it'll also have other strings, right? Maybe to protect workforce, labor unions who work in the city, details about what you can do and can't do. But he also came up with a couple other ideas that I think we need to hear more about, right? A sort of a homestead tax, right? That basically, if you're not living in your home and you own a couple properties in Buffalo, you should pay more. If you have a vacant property, you should pay more. Sort of how those things get fleshed out is something we'll be watching closely.
Good point.
Something definitely worth bringing up, as our local mayors, Niagara Falls, by the way, Restaino asked for $200 million for Centennial Park at Tin Cup Day. As Niagara Falls mayor, Buffalo mayor are there. Just yesterday, Mamdani, the mayor of New York City, was granted $1.5 billion to help get them out of a financial hole, which is, I believe, $7 or $8 billion that they're facing in New York City. So, how does that get justified that the state is bailing them out, not all of what they need, obviously, but then we're over here on the other side of the state saying, wait a second, we need help too.
Right. Well, as a homeowner in Buffalo, I was looking at the exact same thing, right? I mean, look, you're seeing the political dynamics at play here. New York City's a lot bigger. Mamdani is a national phenomenon. Look at his campaign, look at his platform, and he's using it effectively, right? I mean, he has still been out there, even though the governor proposed a balanced budget that provides a lot of other services, makes up for some of the federal cuts. He has still said we need to raise taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers. Now, we all know that's something we've heard from the governor she doesn't want to do. So how do they meet in the middle? And it sounds like this is a piece of it. But, man, there's going to be a lot of pressure in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany. Even some of these other smaller, sort of next round cities are facing just huge challenges. And I think the political will is going to be there to do something. The question is, what is it?
Yeah, these are state tax dollars as well, not just downstate tax dollars being used here.
Plus, we're also talking about them being challenged further by the federal government and any cuts that are still on the horizon at the state level, which, of course, trickle down. One of the people who are going to be voting on that state aid, that level of state aid, is Jeremy Zellner, a new state senator. He beat out Dan Gagliardo in the special election on February 3rd. He will now be in that seat, replacing Sean Ryan, who, of course, is Buffalo's mayor, representing the 61st district. Can we talk briefly just about that? That was a win that was anticipated. He came out there. Gagliardo ran a strong campaign. I like his message of unity, particularly toward the end. I thought he did a great job there. But Zellner is not done. He still has a lot of more campaigning to do, all while still trying to figure out where the bathroom is up at the Capitol, right?
It's a really tough job, right? And we've talked about that here. You know, you see the tip of the iceberg of the work that good state legislators do. These budget hearings that go 10, 12, 14 hours a day is a good example of that. Jeremy Zellner has to, like you said, find the bathroom and find his way through while dealing with a Democratic primary challenge from another sitting state legislator, John Rivera. And kind of how that goes. He's got 4 months to do that. And we see a lot of folks lining up, right? We've seen a lot of labor unions endorse Rivera. Right. And I think, you know, it's a challenge to govern in those, you know, with those circumstances. But a lot of this is also the Mandami effect, right? I mean, we see a lot increasingly of Democratic primaries coming from New York City, coming from the Democratic Socialist America, DSA, the Working Families Party, right, are really endorsing some of these legislators and challenging some other more status quo legislators. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in this primary.
I think that leads well into talking about India Walton. So we know that Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado ended his race for governor. It was a short-lived race, but he had mentioned India Walton, or he had pegged India Walton as his running mate for all of 1 week. Let's talk about why it was so short. But first of all, why India Walton here in Buffalo? Why was that you think his choice?
Well, again, back to this center left versus far left, right? I mean, that's the question about the Democratic Party right now. And Antonio Delgado, irregardless of how he served in Congress, which was much more in that center lane, you know, was really trying to capture some of that left-wing progressive energy. India Walton is a living, breathing example of that, right? Having won the Democratic primary for mayor as a Democratic socialist with endorsement and help from the Working Families Party. I think a lot of that is what Delgado really wanted to tap into. And while you say it was short, it was very short for her. You know, he spent 1.5 years out there saying he had differences with the governor and wasn't able to really capture that energy or do it. I mean, we just saw a huge flex from Kathy Hochul over the last couple weeks, right?
True.
Democratic convention, excuse me, she got over 85% of the weighted vote at that. The Working Families Party, no super friend of Kathy Hochul and her policies, did not endorse Delgado. They endorsed a placeholder. You know, a lot of this, again, labor unions coming out, Mayor Mandami endorsing Hochul, all the Democrats in the state, congressional delegation, including AOC, endorsing Hochul. You know, she put on a show, and it worked.
It did. All right. I think that is, let's do one more. Relative to the state budget, you wanted to talk more about how localities were approaching legislators and what they were asking for. What did you want to talk about with that?
Well, I think a lot of this is, you know, we know the dollars and cents, right? Yes. I mean, it makes sense. Your taxes go up, and what does that mean? It's the other policies that they're asking for relief on. They're asking for decisions about, right? Again, is that, for instance, on the city of Buffalo, are we treating people different if they live here?
Right.
Are we treating people different if they own 5 units versus 3 versus 10? A lot of those come down to really not just the dollars and cents, but they affect your quality of life, right? Depending on the neighborhood you're in. You know, what does that mean for business policies? What does that mean for trying to revive downtown? What are we doing about office conversions to apartments? Like, all of those details are sort of less sexy, and you're not going to see them tomorrow in your pocketbook. But in the long run, that's going to affect your property value.
Okay. Jack, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate this. We look forward to seeing you each and every month on these topics because, again, we should know budget season has been relatively on time after famously not being on time, right, with Governor Cuomo so many years. So we're thinking that some of these answers or some of these questions could be answered by, do we think April 1st? I know that's the deadline, but do we think it's going to be then or closer to maybe June when it has been in the past?
Well, right now, the line in the state legislative majority is within 10 days of April 1st, right, which, we'll call that timely if we will in Albany speak.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Good
Very
enough.
good. Well, we'll continue to have you on. You do a great job explaining things for us.
Thanks, Jack.
We appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
All right, coming up, we are talking about some kindness being spread across Western New York today. It is the International Day of Random Acts of Kindness. We'll go to one of those events in downtown Buffalo coming up.